on. I'll forget that by the time the classes come to an end, and then you can remind me of what number it is. It's good to see you all out tonight. We are in a study on the book of Daniel. If you want to have your Bibles open there. I did not get a chance to make a PowerPoint for tonight, so I apologize if you benefit from those. Hopefully you do, but it's just been one of those weeks. It's just been very time-hungry weeks. It's just devoured all my time, but very thankful to be able to have this time to be able to study together, to open up Scripture together, and to study this wonderful and fantastic book. Now, we have been studying a book that is, about 500, almost 600 years prior to Jesus even coming onto the scene. We're talking about a book that is absolutely and foremost about the sovereignty of God. And inside of that, we've been talking about this power of faith in the midst of a world that does not know God. Because we have the children of Israel taken captive into Babylon. We have Nebuchadnezzar on the throne, or have had Nebuchadnezzar on the throne, a wicked man, and whether it's Daniel or his three friends, we have seen what faith looks like in the midst of some really, really hard circumstances. Last week, we talked about Nebuchadnezzar himself, writing chapter 4 and having this experience where God teaches him that God is in fact in control and that God is the one who appoints the leaders of men. Chapter 5, we're going to leave the scene of Nebuchadnezzar and we're going to be on the scene with now his grandson on the throne. And you might see a familiar name. It's slightly different, but what was Daniel's Babylonian name? Belteshazzar, okay? And now we're going to see Belshazzar without the T. So we're talking about two different people, and you're going to see both names in this. Belteshazzar is the Babylonian name for Daniel, and Belshazzar is the king, which is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, okay? So it's possible that his son is also a co-regent. That was not uncommon, but he is the man in charge. And we're going to see in this the fall of the Babylonian Empire. And we saw that predicted in chapter 2 that there'd be another empire that rises, which will be the Medes and the Persians. The Persians will basically usurp that whole thing and become the empire. But in the beginning, it's the combination. We talked about this in just kind of passing. The Babylon was just this fortified city. There was no way you're going to get through it. And they are going to, it's not going to be in here, but we're going to see them raid if we get that far. But historically, what they did is they bypassed the river that ran through the city, and they diverted the water to bring the water level down so they could cross underneath the wall. And they did it, and here's the thing, they did it while we read about this party in this text. And that's when Babylon and all that's going to fall. And we're going to have the rise of the next empire. But we're in chapter 5, verse 1. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of 1,000. So he's got 1,000 lords, who knows how many servants and everything. He's throwing himself a big grand party. In verse 2, while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and the concubines might drink from them. Now, I know it's calling him his father, and that's not unheard of. They talk about the lineage. They'll talk about David's descendants and his father being David, but I believe he's actually his grandson. But anyway, in the story, he's throwing a party, and as the party gets going, he's like, you know what? We could really use some fancy dishes. And what ones does it go to get? The ones from the temple. Now think about that for a second. What possibly would have been the temple of God that they're actually bringing in to use now? Well, it's from the temple and the tabernacle. There was the showbread, and then there was the wine that was used as part of their sacrifices and part of their worship. In other words, it wasn't just they had some dishes like we might have at the fellowship hall. These were parts of their worship and parts of their prays on the God, and he goes and gets them and brings them in so they can do what with them?
Party with them.
Yeah, party it up. It's not even that we hear of or see. It's not even something Nebuchadnezzar did. And this is something that you see often, and it's really hard to undo it. I don't know how you undo it. I think there's people who break the trends, but the trends seem to hold up. Each generation that seems to follow, does it get more righteous or more corrupted by the world? Now, eventually, there's kind of a reset, isn't there? We see that in the whole time of the book of Judges, where you'd have them get worse and worse, and the judge would rise up, and then all of a sudden they turn back to God, and that generation would be faithful, and then turn around, what would happen again? Worse and worse and worse. And the cycle would repeat. There is something about ease and comfort that leads us and tends to lead us to fulfill our own desires, which ultimately brings corruption. It's not just amongst God's people, though. It's among all the people. Nebuchadnezzar has not been challenged. His kingdom has not been challenged. So, grandson, son, whoever he is, I do think he is his grandson, his life is basically a party. He doesn't have to worry about anything, right? So he's partying it up, goes to get these vessels that had been taken from the temple. Verse 3, then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. And they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. And then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that his joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. So they're having this party. And what happens? It says the lampstand, so I'm assuming that it was probably a prominent lampstand. And opposite it, maybe in kind of like a shadow against the wall, what does he see? A human hand, and it's starting to write. We're going to find out what he's writing here in a minute. When he sees it, what's his response? He goes weak in the knees, doesn't he? Yeah, and them knees start to shake and chatter, and all this carrying on. He's terrified. That's what the picture is, right? And this is what's going to happen, what's going to be read. So the king cried out, verse 7, to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be third ruler in the kingdom. That's what makes me think there may be a co-regent. Like his dad may still be part ruler, because it gives him third spot. Now, maybe there's some other historical...
I read somewhere, I can't remember where I read this, that his dad was still alive, but he had some health issues.
Yeah, and that was not uncommon. Even in the Jewish times, sometimes people try to add the kings, and they just stack the times. Like we're used to presidents, you only have one king at a time. But sometimes they overlap because of health issues or for other reasons. But anyway, so he offers them basically third in charge of all of Babylon for being able to interpret this. You have a similar pattern, don't you? Interpretation of dreams and scenes. We talked about Joseph in Egypt. We've already seen it with Daniel. I said, why aren't they calling Daniel? Yeah. Go ahead.
What is the significance of the Chaldeans? They've been mentioned with the wise men and met before. I thought that was a country.
It is. Well, it's the people. It's the heritage of the people. They're Chaldeans. They're from the Chaldeans. And Babylon is the name of the empire, named after its capital city. But I think the distinction of the Chaldeans is a lot of these soothsayers and wise men were the men that they took when they conquered from other nations, like Daniel. So I think that's why they're making the distinction of the Chaldeans versus the rest of these. But the point is, he's still they're grabbing the same group of people who've never been able to, do these things before, right? Nebuchadnezzar tried it time and time again, and they couldn't do it. And now here is Belshazzar doing the same thing. And he doesn't seem to know Daniel. And we'll find that out here in a second. I think of the time when Solomon, David's son, is ruling over Israel, and all of his wisdom, and of course he brought in a lot of corruption, unfortunately. He brought in the high places to all of his wives so they could worship and all that. And then when he dies, he has a son. His son's name is Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, it says in the text, doesn't listen to the advisors of his father, and instead listens to the advice of the young men, probably men his age, his friends, whatever. And I think this may be happening here too. New king. I'm not going to go to that old Daniel guy. Who cares about him, right?
Sometimes you got people that said what they wanted to hear.
That's true too.
Daniel
may not have been so popular on that. Like, we just use Elijah with some of the kids at school, and Ahaz and Jezebel, they didn't quite like what he had to say, so it may have been one of those scenarios. All right, so he calls all these people in. Verse 8. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. In other words, it was in some kind of language that they could not understand. Verse 9, then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. And the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. She wasn't there. Is it possible this was not the queen as in his wife, but possibly his mother? Maybe. And what happens next makes me think that's a great possibility. All right? The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. She wasn't there. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. Verse 11, there's a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God, and in the days of your father light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers, inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. Again, it's more interior evidence. I don't believe this is directly his son, but his grandson, because he surely would have known about Daniel, because Daniel was ruling under Nebuchadnezzar. So anyways, he doesn't seem to know who Daniel is, and here comes the queen seeing the commotion and says, you need to go get Daniel. And he obviously had been demoted at some point, right? Because he's not still, he was this high place. So I love the description. How does she describe Daniel? Besides the chief of those things, look at verse 12.
She describes him as a really smart guy with knowing things that other people don't know.
Yeah. An excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams. We've seen that. Solving riddles and explaining enigmas. All right. So why would that man be on the sidelines? Can't answer that. But again, maybe it's, as Alan pointed out, maybe he gave advice to Nebuchadnezzar's son, or even Nebuchadnezzar later after chapter 4, that they didn't appreciate, and he kind of got pushed to the side. But the queen remembered. So they're going to send for Daniel. Look at verse 13. Daniel was brought in before the king. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I've heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light, understanding, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men and the astrologers have been brought in before me, that they should read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not give the interpretation of the thing. Now, for fun, because this is what I do, and I don't know if you do this, can you imagine being in Daniel's shoes? Just imagine it for a second. You walk back into this palace that you probably at some point have been excommunicated from, where you were, praised at one point, and you hear again, for the how many time that all these wise people were brought in, and then you were brought in when they failed. There is something really, really almost tragically beautiful about sometimes not being the first choice. We do live in a world sometimes where we can be discouraged because it seems like we're being chosen after someone else. Well, that wasn't my first choice. Well, this person over here. Sometimes the best aren't chosen first. You're going to say something else?
I have a theory that we'll see here in a minute that he doesn't want the riches and honors and stuff. He didn't play ball. Like they say, he didn't play ball with them.
Yeah. He wasn't interested in the same things, that's for sure. There's along those lines, though, of not being chosen first. In the book of Acts, in chapter 1, when they have to replace Judas because of prophecy, if you remember, there were two men. And there were very, very special circumstances. They had to have been there, present, from the time of the baptism of John and to his crucifixion. Two men met that qualification. One would be chosen, one was not. But could you imagine, you are and have been a disciple literally from day one, walking with that crowd, being involved there, but you weren't chosen. That entire ministry of Jesus. When you think of those two men and you see their names, just keep that in mind. What was their faith like? Jesus went out, he went and started picking people and said, you're one of them, and you're one of them, and, well, you're not one of them, and you're one of them. They were in that group. And yet, they didn't give up, obviously. They continued to walk with him, they continued to be with him, they continued to be a part of that. And when one was chosen, one of them got the job. There's just something sometimes beautifully, I don't say tragic, but it almost is, because we think I'm just overlooked and whatever, and yet maybe that's because God has something else planned. And I think that's what happens to Daniel again. Whatever happened before this, in between chapters 4 and 5, here he is again. Hearing the same ritual, the same routine. Everybody else failed. Now we go get Daniel. All right, enough side little business. We'll get back into it.
Almost seems like Daniel gets called in as the expert.
Yeah, but the final expert, right? It's like they'd rather hear from anybody else first, and then if they fail, then here comes Daniel. That's kind of tragic. We don't do that with God, do we? We don't seek advice from everybody else, and then when it falls and falls and fails, that's when we go to God.
Yeah, well done.
Maybe something for us to pay attention to, huh? Maybe what would happen so many times if we went to Him first. All right, let's look what happens. If you know the story, obviously you know what happens, but the wise men, they couldn't do it. The astrologers, they couldn't do it. He gives them praise. He tells them about, verse 16, we'll go ahead and read it. And I have heard of you that you can give interpretations, explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and you shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. In verse 17, Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another, yet I will read the writing to the king, and I will make known to him the interpretation. As Alan just pointed out, did Daniel care about all that stuff? No. He didn't care. He's like, I'm going to read it for you. He probably already knows. Do you think he has an inkling this is not going to be good news?
Why would you want to be an official when they're about to be overcome and taken?
He might be reading the writing on the wall.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. That's where this comes from, people. Okay. All right. If you did not know, this is the story where that saying comes from. Anyway, He's like, no, you can keep that, give that stuff to someone else, but I'll make known the interpretation. Verse 18. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor. And because of all the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. We've seen that, right? Whomever he wished, he kept alive. We've seen that too. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. We just read about that last week. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. And they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. However, that was the lesson that he seemed to fail to learn, and God gave him, an unavoidable lesson on it, right? So now he's going to turn it on Belshazzar. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. I mean, whether it's his son or his grandson, as I'm supposing, no doubt he's heard about this instance, right? No doubt that's been talk of the town for a long time about what happened to the great Nebuchadnezzar. And he knew this, and he was taught this. Verse 23. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Man, that's a powerful statement. What did they worship?
Things.
Okay, you want to see a little, really, really tight but very pointed explanation of what idolism is? Look back at this verse and look at what they worshipped. He didn't name the gods that were attached to these things. What did he name? And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. What do all those things have in common?
They're all made of God.
That's true. They're all shaped with man's hands.
They do not see or hear or know.
Nope.
God, who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified.
That's right. Think about what they worshipped. They can mold it into whatever they wanted to. But those were empty. The God who literally holds his breath in his life, as Eugene just read again for us, they didn't worship him. Think about the things that we, as a culture, worship. I'm not talking about, we don't have Baals anymore that people fashion out of gold and whatever, and we don't have silver, little trinkets of Dinah or something like that like the Greeks did. But be sure, we worship idols. What are they?
Money, power.
Sports figures. Just all kinds of things.
Anything that is not God, and anything that is not God, the worship of it is going to be what? Yeah, idol. It's going to be empty. But you notice that it's often things we think are valuable. We could spend a lot of time on idols here in this picture, but let's go back and read that one more time, and we won't get hung up there too long. And you have praised the gods, this is back up in verse 23, of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath. He didn't say our breath. He was very personal with this. Did Nebuchadnezzar learn that lesson? He did, didn't he? But here, Belshazzar is not, who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways. Is that true of Belshazzar? That he holds his breath and he owns all of his ways? What does that mean? There is nothing that he can do that God doesn't what? Okay, allow, but he owns it all. Did Jonah not learn that? When the prophet said, no, I'm not going to Nineveh, I'm going to hightail it the other way. We need to see these things because these things are true for us too. Does he hold our breath in his hand? Does he hold and own all of our ways? That doesn't mean he makes all of our decisions, but we can't overthrow God. We cannot. Our choices cannot usurp his, even if we don't choose his things. He will do what he intends to do, and Nebuchadnezzar had learned that. Belshazzar is going to learn that in a really critical way, but it's going to be his final lesson because he's not going to live through it. Okay. So what did he write? Let's get into that. Verse 24. Then the fingers on the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. I am not going to pronounce this right. So, anyways, but it's Mene Tekel Upharsin. And there is a hard sound inside that K that I cannot pronounce. So I already know I'm not pronouncing it right. But what does it mean? Well, they didn't know. This was not in Chaldean. This wasn't in a language they knew. It wasn't in any of the conquered languages. So they had to have someone interpret it. This is what the interpretation of each word means. Mean or mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel or Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, which is the second part, that last word, it's the root of it. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And then Belshazzar gave the command, and at least in the man of his word. What did Daniel just tell him? You have been weighed and found wanting. And what? I'm sorry, right before that. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You've been weighed and found wanting. And your kingdom is going to be given to who? I mean, at least this man keeps his word. Because at this news, what does he do? Well, look at the next verse. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. At least he kept his word. Well, what did Daniel tell him? You're done. It's over. Look at the next verse. Verse 30. That very night, Daniel didn't get to wear that gold robe very long, or that purple robe very long, did he? Probably why, he probably knew it. He probably knew before he all saw the handwriting. He's like, ooh, this is not good. He's not blind, he knows what's happening, and he knows God. But he wears it for a little while, but that very night, it says, that very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, this isn't a history book to tell us history. Where it speaks of history, it's correct. This is a book about God and his people that we need to learn. So there's a lot of things we could add to this as far as historical, which, I love history. I can spend a lot of time in it. The Medes, we'll start off with them. They'll be more dominated by the Persians before we're done. But the idea is God did what he said he would do. And we need to know that. If God says he's going to do something, God's going to do it. What's God told us he's going to do? That might apply to our life, to our world, to our time, to our future.
Jesus is coming back.
He said, I'm coming back. He said in a couple different ways. In John 14, he said in a very encouraging way to his followers There, in my Father's house, there are many rooms or many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. Isn't that awesome? He may be talking about the way to those houses, but the picture I get is he's going to prepare a house, a home, a room for you and me. That's awesome. Man, I don't know what God's house looks like. I don't know if we can actually fathom what that reality is, because we're talking about a spiritual realm, not a physical, and that's all we know. When we get to the book of Revelation and to have this heavenly picture, and there's pearl gates and there is gold on the... I have a feeling that's the best way you could use to describe it, because we can only understand what?
What we know and what we see.
Right. But I think it's going to be far more precious and beautiful than those pictures even can describe. I just believe that. And he said, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, then I am going to what? Come again to receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. That's something God promised his followers. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7, as Paul is writing, he says, when the Lord is revealed in heaven, giving what? The righteous rest and comfort and hope. When we hit verse 8, it says, when the Lord is revealed with his angels in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who know not God and who obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. I think there are some thinking that God is like we are sometimes, where we make a threat and don't follow through. When I started teaching years ago, not in Bible class, but I started trying to teach at the school. I had this idea that, it was going to be Bible class. And I had taught youth groups and all that stuff and really had a good time, and I realized, nope, even my youth group kids, the church kids who were in that Bible class, still saw it at school, so still saw it as something where I'm going to act up and carry on and whatever. And I had a hard time managing because I was so used to more of a free-flowing thought with my students from Bible classes and stuff, and I learned quickly that wouldn't work. Well, I had a hard time for a long time because I'd basically make a threat and then wouldn't carry through with it. Maybe we can relate to that sometimes as parents. We'll make a threat, a punishment, discipline, or whatever. Maybe we don't carry through with it. That's not God. God isn't going to say he's going to do one thing and not do it. Good, bad, or otherwise, if he said he's going to do it, you can bank on the fact that he's going to what? He's going to do it. What happened that night to Belshazzar? He was slain. Let me go back into this, and we'll open up some thoughts and questions, and we'll follow those where they may take us. Why was the emphasis put on so many times on the vessels from the temple? Do you think God cares about those pieces of gold and all that?
Weren't they consecrated?
They were consecrated, and that means they were set aside for God.
He didn't care about the substance they were made of or the shape, but what they represented. That was not a good idea to wave it in God's face, so to speak.
I think it has to do with the fact that they had sat there all that time. They sat there for all that time for a reason. Nebuchadnezzar, despite his flaws, from the very get-go, must have shown respect to Daniel. Remember, at the very beginning he did. From the first interpretation he gave. So I have a feeling he didn't touch any of that stuff out of respect. He had taught his people then not to touch that stuff out of respect. And what did his grandson, son, whoever this actually is, do? He said, well, now's the time for us to go get that stuff. It's almost like an overt, direct challenge, isn't it? I'll also point this out. When did he make that decision? I won't make the social commentary. I just want to make sure that you understand and see. He didn't start off the verse, but as he's preparing the party, he said, you know what? Our party would look kind of fancy if we go get those things. I'm going to go back all the way to the beginning of this chapter. It said, Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of them while he tasted the wine. Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver. What had he been doing already?
Drink.
He'd already been drinking.
What they do with the Ark of the Covenant?
What did they do with the Ark of the Covenant? Well, they hid it somewhere so that Indiana Jones could find it.
It's in Africa.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does go missing, and you don't know what happened to it.
Some people believe that Nebuchadnezzar melted it down and did something with it, but nobody knows.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody will know. Here's why I don't think you'll ever know. I don't think you'll ever see the cup, the search for the Holy Grail. There was a wooden cup somewhere that he drank from that night, Jesus. It wasn't anything holy about the cup, the physical cup. What do you say was holy?
Jesus drank from it.
Huh?
Jesus touched it with drink from it. He represents the blood of the...
Yeah, no, he said he was holy, didn't he?
Yeah.
He said, this represents my blood, not it, and not the cup, and not the bread itself, but it's all representation of who he is and what he is. And people have been searching for that thing like it's some kind of magical talisman that's going to give them power. Why do you think we don't have the Ark of the Covenant?
Because it'll be made out of a spectacle.
Yeah.
People have to pay to see it.
Sure. Somebody try to make money off it. Some will declare themselves powerful because of it. People will bow down and worship it, not God. They'll worship it.
Yeah.
Just like the law in the Old Testament, by the time you get to the Pharisees in the New Testament, I don't know if you catch this, but Jesus' complaint against them was not about the letter of the law or the wording of the law. It was about the fact that they worshiped the law and not the God who gave it. Man, there are lessons that repeat themselves over and over and over again. But he should have left well enough alone. Would this still have happened to him? Don't know. But we knew it was coming because all the way back in Daniel 2, God said Babylon wasn't going to be forever. There was going to be a new kingdom rise up after it, right? I appreciate your thoughts and comments so far tonight, but is there any other comments or questions before we get into our invitation tonight?
There's confusion about who this Darius the Mede is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not certain who there's not that I know of anything else mentioned about a Darius the Mede.
Well, there is a Darius mentioned.
Yeah, but not that one. Darius the Great.
And that it gives us his age is odd to me. And that he was 62. Okay, okay. Why is that important? I don't know. There's probably something that when it was written, people understood who he was, that we have kind of lost in time. The importance isn't though who the Darius was, or even who Belshazzar was, or who Nebuchadnezzar was. What was the importance the whole time?
It was a satrap or satrap.
What was a satrap?
Yeah.
It's like a...
They divided it up into satrapies, and they would put people in charge of those.
Yeah, I want to say kind of like a state, but it's not really a state. It would be more like a region. You think that's fair? Kind of like, an area. And then you have governors who were inside of those, but they were kind of a step above the governors. All right. Tonight, as we've gathered and we've opened the Word of God, we've talked about things that, yes, are hundreds of years ago, but the principles are still the same. Who rules over the kingdoms of men? God. Who rises up and takes down kingdoms, nations, powers, authorities? God does. Does that mean that God is hand-chosen, so anything that ruler or a ruler does that's God's work and that's God? No. It means that God is not lax. He's not sitting on the sidelines. He is involved. And unfortunately, sometimes that bad things happen and bad rulers come. If we pay attention to the Israelites, why were they in captivity? They disobeyed God. And that was part of not just the judgment. It wasn't just about punishment. And that's something that we get caught up in. It was about understanding When you remove God from the picture, what's left?
Heartache and hardship.
Yes, sir. And we are experts at it. And every time you remove God from the picture, whether a little bit or a lot, where does it lead? Heartache and hardship. Is that true in Noah's day?
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, that's why he had to wash the earth clean, wasn't it? Was that true in Moses' day?
Yeah.
It's been true in every day, in every age. That's why I quoted 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7. We got down through verse 9 where he says, in flaming fire, verse 8 and 9, taking vengeance on those who know not God and who obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Then it says, and these shall be separated from God in everlasting punishment. We talk about the flame, we talk about torment, we talk about all these pictures. That statement, separated from God. You know that one of the attributes of God is that He is all places and all times, that He is everywhere, right? He's omniscient, He is all-seeing, but He's also omnipresent. In other words, He is consistently present no matter where we are. God made a place where even He decided He would not be. And you think about the reality of that, those who choose not to be with God, He's actually giving them what they choose. But we've talked about this in our study, in our series not long ago. There's light and life in God. It's the only place it is. So all of our pictures, if you think about all the pictures of Gehenna or Tartarus or hell or whatever names we're going to put on it, what are they? Gnashing of teeth, darkness, flame. I think that's just part of the torment picture. But without God. I can't imagine a world as evil as this one is at times. God is still present. There's still limits. There's still cups that overflow, and God says, that's enough. I can't handle any more. Judgment has to come. But in a place where He is not. The other side of that is, what about a place where we get to experience the fullness of His presence? That's the heavenly picture. And tonight, it's not about how many things you can do. It's not about how fancy your worship is. It's about a choice. Really, it's ultimately about, am I going to walk with God or am I going to walk with the world? Am I going to walk with God or am I going to walk in my own things? And if I'm going to walk with God, if I'm going to be like Daniel, if I'm going to be like Moses, if I'm going to be like Joseph, if I'm going to be like Jesus, if I'm going to be like the disciples or Mary Magdalene or Mary and Martha, if I'm going to be like these people, then what does Jesus ask me to do? Obey His gospel. The word gospel, that evangelion, means good news, and you've probably heard that many times. It actually is not a new word to the New Testament. It appears in the Greek far before that, and it was the word that Augustus Octavius Caesar used to declare his goodness on the Roman Empire. Jesus said, no, I'm the one with true good news. He went to a cross and died for us, paid for our sins. What does He ask of us? To repent of those sins?
Follow Him.
He's the one who declared to the world from the resurrection and His power in it that He is the Son of God. Romans 1 verse 5. What does He ask? Us to agree with Him, to make the same confession?
Yes.
He's went to a grave, literally giving up His life, going into that grave, into death, into all that for 3 days. What does He ask of us? To be buried with Him for a moment under the water to rise in newness of life. We serve a good God. And if you are subject to that gospel tonight, we encourage you to let your needs be known as we stand and sing a song of invitation.